So here we are in Boston, Massachusetts on a fine fall afternoon. At the bottom of your screen is Boston's Logan International Airport. Hello Flight Simmers, Brett Wild here. It's been a while since I've done a YouTube video, but lately I've been studying the FlyJSim Q4XP, or their 2021 rendition of the de Havilland 8 Q400, which replaced FlyJSim's original, which they released back in 2009. I thought it was great then, and I like the new one even better. So I thought I would share some things that I have learned by flying from Boston down to Baltimore, Washington Airport. As we zoom in on the aircraft, by the way, this is Mr. X's amazing freeware scenery, you get a sense of the size difference between the Dash 8 and the larger aircraft around it, which makes the Dash 8 all the more suitable for a commuter airline like Porter, which does fly out of Boston. And from what I can tell from the forums, this aircraft is a favorite among simmers, probably because of its great graphics, its detailed systems, stability, and immersion. Now, it may not qualify for a study aircraft, but you can't just click the start button and go. You have to play by the rules. One thing that has particularly caught my interest lately is the two Pratt & Whitney PW150 turboprops. I've always taken the startup and operation of these turboprops for granted, but I got curious and took a little time to understand exactly how they work. But I'll get into this when we're ready to start the engines. So let's plan our flight from runway to runway using a SID, an airway, and a star. Now, not the most detailed or complicated flight plan that this FMS is capable of, but at least it gives you an idea of how it works. So let's dive in. So when choosing a SID, I'm looking for a transition that gets me as close to my en route portion as I can. So as I flip through the available SIDs out of Boston, you can see in each case, it's not getting me to the southwest where I want to go until we get to Pattis. And that takes us down here to the Pattis transition. And this gets us as close to the southwest as possible. Next, we're looking for a star. And again, we want a transition that takes us from our en route portion directly to our arrival. So you can see here that this one comes from the west, this one from the southeast, again from the west. And when we get to Trish 4, we can see that this is probably the one we're going to use because note nudgy here, which is to the northeast. And you'll see how that works in a minute as we plan our approach. And we're going to use the RNAV or RNP Z into 33 left. And the distinguishing feature of an RNP approach is that you do not have to fly all the way out to an extended initial approach fix. Instead, you can make this shortcut curve and make a shorter final approach. So it saves time and fuel. So here is our flight plan in SkyVector without any SID or star or airways. But let's fix that and add in the star and SID that we have selected. I should say the SID and the star. And I'm going to throw in an airway at the same time. We'll zoom in a little bit here. So we decided that we're going to be using Pattis. And you can see that it immediately creates a waypoint here, which is our transition. And if we flip over to the high route map, you can see here we transition at Pattis, but where do we go? We want to go over here to Nellie, and Nellie is the entry ramp for our airway, which is Q75, and Q75 will get us very close here to Nudgee, which is our transition. So we'll get off the airway here at Stone, and then to our transition at Nudgee. And you'll see here that Trish is automatically added in the SkyVector flight plan. So we've got our route established. Let's back out for a longer view. Go back to our world VFR. So we are flying a little bit west of Hartford, west of the New York City area, west of Philadelphia, and down into Baltimore. Now before I leave SkyVector, I'm going to select and copy the flight plan to my clipboard. So when I go over to SimBrief, I can paste it into the routing. So we'll do a new flight, and this is going to be KBOS, Kilo Bravo Oscar Sierra to Kilo Bravo Whiskey India, DH. This aircraft uses the DH-8D or 402. It does suggest this flight plan, which takes us way out west. Not sure why, but I'm going to paste in the one that we just created and have it analyzed, and it seems to be valid. The only thing that SimBrief really supplies us that's useful for the Q4XP is the fuel usage. Other than that, not much. But let's go ahead and generate the flight and check out the PDF. And I'm looking for just a couple of things. Block fuel is 2922 kilograms, and we drop down to passengers and cargo, and we've got 54 passengers, 1347 of bags and cargo. Total payload would be 5633. We use those numbers when we set up the aircraft in the electronic flight bag in the Q4XP. So let's do a cold and dark start. We'll head over to our electronic flight bag and set up our load. We're going to go with 54 passengers, give or take a few. Our total cargo is 1347, give or take a few. Total fuel 2922. Better have more than less. Click on load summary. Just check our stats here, and then confirm our load. And you have two options. You can start loading, which would be a real-time loading, which could take a while, or you can just go with fast load. And when you do that, you can see the aircraft kind of bounce because you've just added a lot of weight to it. Next, we connect our GPU, and you can hear it in the background. On the upper panel, we turn on our battery master, main battery, auxiliary, and standby. Turn on external power, air conditioning, recycling. Finally, our position lights, which are nav lights, just let people know that there's something going on in the aircraft. We can adjust our lights a little bit later as we need them. There's a series of optional tests that you can do. We start with the flight data recorder, and you'll look for a little light to disappear over here after I press this. And you can see the light in the upper right hand corner disappear. Next, our APU. We turn on the APU. You notice that the fuel valve is now open, and we click fire test, and we get the appropriate lights. Next, over to our baggage fire test. Both are showing the appropriate lights, and finally the aft baggage. Then our engine tests, starting with number 2 and then number 1, and again we are seeing the right lights pop up. For our next test, we have to turn on our screens. So we'll start with our first FMS, turn it on, and then turn on the PFDs and the MFD. Then our second FMS, and the first officer's PFD, MFD. And then drop down to the center pedestal, turn on our radios, put them on both, that way they are coordinated, and then that center screen to bright. And you'll see them slowly come up. Now, over to some tests on the captain's side. First, the stall warning. You're going to hear the terrain warning first, and then the stick shaker, which means you're stalling.
Terrain, 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 terrain.
And we can also test the first officer's side by flipping it down. And then there's the air data computer, which validates input from the pitot tubes for the altitude and airspeed. And you'll see some flashing on the captain's PFD. So you would see those indications if there was a problem with that information. And then finally our takeoff warning test, and we see that that's working. Next is the prop test, and you start by clicking the auto feather, and you'll see some indications here. The needles will rise. And it will cycle through once. The trim test, we want to watch these needles to see if there is any movement, and yes, we see the 3 o'clock position and the 9 o'clock position. And finally, the anti-skid test. You'll see lights over in this side of the annunciation panel. Lights are on, and I release it, and the lights will eventually go off. So that completes our tests. So let's complete our startup by starting our APU. We click the power button. You'll see a momentary flash. The fuel valve is open. We click start, and we will wait for the APU to start up. Right now you can see that we've got battery power on both left and right, and zero load on the APU. Now we have a gen light in yellow, which means that we're ready to go. So I turn off external power, turn on the generator, and bleed air. And you can see that we have a load on our APU generator. So that is working. At the same time, we can turn off our GPU. Let's complete our overhead panel scan. We drop down, nothing in this panel at the moment. Once we get the engine started, we will do a few things over here. Nothing here in this panel. Over here we want to check our landing altitude, and Baltimore is 160 feet, so not a lot to do there. You can adjust it here. You can see the needle move slightly. Our cabin altitude should be on auto. We want bleeds off, and then seat belts on, no smoking on, and emergency lights on. Now let's drop to our glare shield. Spoilers should be on taxi. Our nav source should be set to the FMS1, and our altitude to flight level 250. The service ceiling is closer to flight level 300, but it would take forever to climb to that altitude in the sim. It's much more realistic in the actual aircraft, which makes complete sense, but I don't know why it's so slow in the sim. Then click altitude select, and finally turn on our yaw damper and make sure that our anti-skid is on. And finally, let's set our baro to 3024, which is our current pressure. And the last step before starting our engines would be to program our FMS. If you're new to this FMS, it's a little confusing at first because it doesn't operate anything like the Boeing or some of the other FMSs that you're used to. It's more like completing a multiple choice questionnaire. But let's get started. So we'll go ahead and accept our initial position. We start by clicking FPL, or the flight plan. Let's put in our destination. By the way, you can use the keyboard if you click this hidden region here. Notice you get the little hand, and then you'll see it flash down here, which indicates you can use your keyboard. So Bravo Whiskey India for Baltimore, and then I'm clicking the enter key on my keyboard. Click it again to accept it. I have a message here that's just going to tell me I'm not done yet. Thank you very much. Next, click the menu, and then we'll set our departure. So our departure runway is going to be runway 6, and our SID will be PATIS number 7. Our transition is PATIS, so we don't have to enter anything. And you can see our waypoints are getting filled out. Now for our arrival into Baltimore, we're going to be using runway 33 left, which is number 5. Our star is Trish 4, number 5. Our transition is Nudgy, number 4. And our approach is going to be RNAV Z into 33 left, which is number 4. Transition is key. Let's scroll through here, and we have this no link. I want to enter the starting point for our airway Q75. So click that and type in Nelly and enter, accept. Now this next step might not make much sense, but in order to begin an airway at Nelly, you click the link below it. I know it doesn't seem to make much sense. So I'm clicking that, then clicking List, Airways, and from Nelly we want Q75, which is number 1. And we will be exiting at Stone, number 12. And you can see how this gets filled in, and now we just need to delete that no link, flying directly from Stone to Nudgee, which is our transition point. And it looks like I've got vectors here which I want to delete, because we're going to enter waypoints and get rid of the no link. Now let's take a look at our work. So click Format, and if you find that your arrow keys and other keys aren't working, it's because you still are using the keyboard for your FMS, so you have to turn it off. So we got a little bit of a mess here, some extra points. Let's take a look at our FMS. So we've got 2 keys, which means these are probably extra ones. So we can get rid of all of these. So delete, delete, delete. And you can see our flight plan now is a lot cleaner. Finally, we have to complete the fuel portion. I think we ended up with 55. And here's their weight, and our cargo was 1347. And the fuel on board was 2922. So that completes the programming of the FMS. Alright, it's time to plan our pushback using the Better Pushback plugin. Our runway is to our right, so we will back up and be turned in that direction.
Grounded cockpit, plan acknowledged. Call me through the menu when you are ready.
So before we call our tow, I want to talk a little bit about the startup process in this aircraft. The de Havilland Dash 8 is equipped with the Pratt & Whitney PW150 turboprops, which are different than the smaller PT6s that you're used to in the King Air, Caravan, and so on. The process here is a lot simpler than in those other aircraft. I thought it'd be interesting to first of all take a look at those smaller aircraft and their startup process to compare with what happens here. So I'd like to illustrate the startup of a typical turboprop, and this time using the simpler Pratt & Whitney PT6 that you find in the Caravan, the King Air, and here in the Epic 1000. We begin by turning on the fuel pumps, which pressurize the lines, and then we click the igniter, which is like a spark plug inside of the combustion chamber. Nothing happens because there's no fuel yet. And then when we click start, the starter motor begins to turn the blades in the compression chamber. Subsequently, it also turns the prop. Nothing happens again until we add fuel. So we're watching the NG, which is the pressure that is built up by the blades turning as a result of the starter motor. And when it reaches a certain point, then we can add the fuel. Then the next thing we want to watch is the temperature inside of the combustion chamber. So let's turn on our fuel pumps, then the igniter, then the start. So the blades begin to turn and our NG comes up, so we can add fuel to the combustion chamber, and we see the temperature begin to rise as that fuel begins to burn. Our NG also increases, and we just have to keep it out of the red here. The propeller is fully feathered, so I'm going to go ahead and change it to takeoff pitch. And when we're confident everything is working, we can add full fuel. You can see the temperature here is kind of leveling off. Once everything's working, we can turn off the igniter. Here we are back in the Dash 8, and we're looking at the engine start panel. First of all, notice there are no fuel switches to turn on. The ignition switches are already set to normal, so all we have is a start push button and a select toggle. So what's happening here? Well, the Dash 8 is equipped with what is called a FADEC, or Full Authority Digital Engine Control. Basically, it's a computer that handles the more complex aspects of this engine. So when you select number 2, you're telling the computer to focus on the engine that you're going to start. And when you click that start button, the igniters begin to fire, the start motor begins to turn the blades in the compression chamber, and subsequently the props begin to turn. We still have to add fuel using the condition levers. So let's call the tow. By the way, I'm going to speed this up because it does take a while.
Ground to cockpit. Tow is driving up.
And while the tow is driving up, I'd like to close the cockpit door.
Okay, all doors and hatches are closed. Ready to connect. Windshield strap and adapter in position. Release parking brake when ready to start pushback.
Let's turn on our beacon. Let people know there is an engine start and a pushback. Turn on our beacon to let people know we're pushing back and starting our engines. Release the parking brake.
Starting pushback, and you may start engines.
Alright, we'll turn off our bleeds and select our number 2 engine and click start. We'll watch our NH. For some reason it's called NH and not NG. And then advance our condition lever. And you can see the NH continuing, the internal temperature coming up. And we'll run it up to 850 and start number 2, or the second engine I should say.
Operation complete. Set parking brake.
Let me set the parking brake.
Disconnecting tow. Stand by.
Click start. See our NH coming up. Add fuel. Disconnect.
disconnected and bypass pin has been removed. Hand signal on the left. We'll see you next time and have a safe flight.
So we can shut off our APU, turn on our bleeds, turn off our main bus tie. We're going to check our ice protection, and you'll see it will cycle through the boots. And you can see that we have de-ice pressure registering. We can also check our props. Oops. And it will just cycle through. Then let's turn on our pitot heat. So the only thing left on the annunciation panel is the parking brake. Let's turn on our taxi light. And we want 10 degrees of flaps for takeoff. Auxiliary, turn on our auxiliary pumps, standby hydraulic and central, and just check our isolation valve, and you can see it register. So we are good. Turn on auto feather. Next, we want to activate our V-speed, so you just click the bottom of the tape. Then turn on nose steering. That will allow me to use my pedals. Next, our transponder. So you click to set it. So it is now set, and it's on standby, but we want to take it out of standby. We hold it down and click EXP. I'm not sure what that means. And then we want to select TA only for taxiing. We will taxi to 15 right, so straight ahead. Release parking brake. Increase throttles. Let's run our condition levers all the way up. Parking brake, release the control lock, change our transponder to TARA, let the attendants know we're going to be taking off. So this needs to be in the PA position, and you click call. Strobe on, landing lights on, taxi off. spoilers flight position. So, line up and wait. Set our heading to runway. Now there's no, for some reason there isn't a sync. You have to do it on your own. Release the brakes. And power to flight rating. Got a little aggressive there. I'm watching my speed tape. Right V1, rotate. Positive rate, gear up. Autopilot on, navigation on, and I'm going to use the IAS to set my climb speed. 185. Flaps up. And reduce RPM to 900. As we fly this rather lengthy SID, so there's not a lot to do at this point. We can turn off our hydraulics, our auxiliary pump, and auto feather. Bleed flow should go to normal. We're coming up on 10,000 feet, so we can let the flight attendants know that people can use their computers. landing lights can come off. So we are approaching flight level 180. We can change our baro to standard. And now we are westbound on our SID. So it's kind of a pokey climb, not realistic from what I understand. We've been 9 minutes and we still have quite a ways to go, and we're down to 1,000 feet per minute. Anyway, once we get to cruise, I'll be back. There's our chime, 1,000 feet to go. So Nelly is the beginning of our Q4XP airway. But you can see we're down to 500 feet per minute. Turn off the seatbelt sign. So let's pull back our condition levers to 850. We'll keep an eye on our airspeed, but generally I don't have to back the throttles down. Alright, let's check where our top of descent is going to be. Click on VNAV, click on R1, this is our target vertical speed, and we want 1500, that's generally what I use. And we have 38 minutes to our top of descent, or 193 miles. I'm going to keep this screen up because depending on my ground speed, this could change. We are in the middle of our turn over Nelly as we pick up our airway Q75. Not much to see. We are over the western edge of Connecticut, flying towards Newark. I think that's Bradley International. So if we look at our map, we just made this turn at Nelly. And here's our Q45. So we are cruising along, approaching the Newark area. So we've got the mighty Hudson here, and Long Island Sound, Long Island itself. Let's check our fuel situation. So we click the fuel button. It gives us our fuel flow, our takeoff time, how long we've been in the air, the approximate time we will land at Baltimore. You can also pull up a more graphic view of your fuel situation. We're starting to get some nice coloring in the clouds as the sun. Taking a quick look at our final approach chart. So this is the RNPZ into 33 left. Our transition is key, and we need to be at 4,000 feet, not above or below. So I'm going to set my target altitude to 4,000. So we've got 3 minutes. Why don't I dial in that altitude now? And when we are 1 minute from top of descent, we'll get a message, and I'll click the VNAV button, which will pull up an indicator on the PFD that shows our path. And there is our message. Top of descent alert. Click VNAV. It now appears on the PFD, and I get this vertical scale, and you'll see the magenta bar begin to drop as we approach the actual top of descent. And you can see the bar dropping. And the only adjustment I will make will be to the throttles, to avoid an overspeed condition. And we begin our descent. Seatbelts on. So we will pick up the star here at Naji and on down to Key. And then that's when we pick up our final approach and swing on around into Baltimore. We have passed flight level 180. Time to dial in our barometer, and we'll check and see that it's 3011. Airspeed looks good. Looks like a beautiful sunset. It's cool how the sun is just touching the tops of our clouds. So here's Naji. That is the beginning of our star. Alright, as we approach Key and 4,000 feet, a couple of things to note. I've dropped our airspeed down to a reasonable approach speed, so 1,000 feet to go. And I can turn on our auxiliary fuel pump and our hydraulics. You do not turn on auto feather. The most challenging part of this aircraft is the approach and landing, trying to keep it stable. That's not an excuse, it's just that's just the truth. So we'll see how I do on this. So we're approaching that 4,000 mark. So I think we'll be in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and dial this down to our DA, which is about 500 feet. And I'm going to click approach. And just monitor the altitudes, but you can see this curve here. Surprised I don't see the airport. The trick is to avoid chasing your needles. Meaning your airspeed. Let's add a notch of flaps. The flap gauge is located here. So that looks good. 32. Next target is 1,500 feet. And our final approach fix. Vertical profile looks good. Another notch of flaps. And increase our RPM to full.
2,500.
Our missed approach altitude is 3,000. Get that dialed in. Gear down. Flaps 15. So here's 33 right. And full flaps. Should be about 150. Turn on the terrain inhibit warning. Autopilot off. It's taking me a little low. Yeah, I should have been watching that altitude a little bit more. Try to get lined up here.
100,
And you come in with power.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
And brakes, and you don't really need auto reverse on this. The brakes do just fine. Get off the runway. All right, retract our flaps. Taxi light on, landing light off, strobe off, beacon on. Yaw damper off. Looking for a stand here. Pitot heat off. Control lock. Trying to read my checklist. Forgot my transponder. Parking brake. Fuel pumps off. Hydraulics off. Condition levers to feather. And we hold that for 30 seconds. Beacon off. And we'll ask to connect the GPU. And finally, fuel off. So that pretty much takes care of our flight. I'll just leave the lights where they are. But we do need to get people off the airplane. Need some lighting there, don't we? There we go. And how about some lights in the cabin? All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Wasn't perfect, but hopefully educational. If you have input or questions, please let me know in the comments. And we'll see you next time.